Kodiak Island, Alaska, and west towards Bristol Bay. She lives in Astoria now with her 2 kids and Coast Guard husband, which is always handy if you're a fisherwoman, you know. She lives with her Coast Guard husband. She found Fisher Poets in 2008 and was thrilled to have found her people. Let's give it up for Erica Clark.
My dad used to make this joke. My mom was a teacher's aide, and he said a smart fisherman marries a teacher because summer's off and health insurance. And on my wedding day, I'd known my partner for 10 years. At that point, I turned to my father and I said, I gotcha. Smart fisherman marries a coastie because health insurance, and you always get picked up out of the water first. So, let's have a round for the support people in our fishing industry. Everybody who picks us up out of the water. I am delighted to be here this evening with you. And the first thing I'm going to tell you about is kind of what started me on this journey. I did fish in and around Kodiak Island for my entire childhood growing up. And then as a young adult, dabbled in some long lines, some jigging, some seining, and some sea cucumbering, and they are delicious for anyone who is wondering. But I want to talk about the deckhands, because I became a deckhand, but I was also partially raised by deckhands. And these are not people that you would typically see hanging out with children. These are people in stained Carhartts and ripped sweatshirts, and women who haven't washed their hair in weeks because they've been on a boat that's dry. But these are the people that broke bread around our table as a child. These are the people that got on our boat for season after season and became aunts and uncles to us as we lived so far from our blood relations. And if you grew up in a fishing family, you probably have a special place in your heart for a deckhand or two. And this one is called Mike Johnson. He was my Manny. He was one of those deckhands that just stuck around our family for half a decade or more, fishing season after season. We never really knew what became of him after he left. It was one of those old familiar stories of pirates and scallywags leaving behind the family for the sea. Or in our case, he left behind his chosen family, jumped ship, and moved on to another. But oh, how I loved him and how he adored me. We'd walk hand in hand on the beaches of the Aleutian Peninsula, miles down the beach, at such an amble that I now, as a parent myself, know is monotonous to an adult. But I can still remember holding that one pointer finger and seeing the long legs wrapped in oil-stained khaki Carhartts slowly striding next to me, and all the treasures we collected together. My parents will tell stories to people about watching me and he through the binoculars, strolling down the beach, becoming one tall shape a mile or two down the beach, and then growing taller and taller and larger on our return, most of the time with him dragging behind a hollowed-out buoy aft of us filled with glass balls and sticks that I had deemed invaluable and other flotsam, while the other hand was somehow grappling with my hand and my leg, trying to keep me on his shoulders in the inevitable shoulder ride that escorted me back to the boat. His name was Mike Johnson, and I don't know what happened to him. But my 5-year-old self loved him fiercely, and I am thankful for his willingness to walk the miles of tide line with me, an investment into my future passion for oceans advocacy and fisheries that he most never knew that he sowed the seeds for. Decades of anti-pebble volunteerism, countless beach cleanups organized, and it is with this gratitude that I pass on his legacy to my children. In the last few years, my town of Kodiak has had some tragedy among our young fishing community. And most recently, it touched my family in a way that I had always prayed and hoped that it wouldn't. And so this is my call out to all of the fishermen of my generation and to all of the fishermen who are now watching the boats leave the shore to step in. And it's titled Mayday. I am sick of it, of the dying, of the loss, of the grieving families and friends, of the people who love you and miss you and wish for you to have made different choices than you did, man, and I didn't see you. I didn't understand you, but I know you. I know you from the stories that your mother tells me. I read it in the Facebook posts of the friends who grieve you and in the voices that crack and break and tear as they call one by one each person on the phone, relaying this sad news down the cork line. That the ground line has been cut, that the net is tangled and the ship is sinking, and we are struggling to stay afloat. We are grasping and coming screaming up alongside you in the skiff, and too often it is too late. I don't want us to go quietly into the night. I don't want us to watch our brothers and sisters' light sink deeper into the dark depths. I don't want the EPIRB to go off in far-off waters as the last thing we hear of you and your precious smile and your skilled and calloused hands. I want you to live. I want you to sail across the swells of the sea until your hair has gone gray and the skin is tanned and cracked by the sun and the salt spray hitting it for decades. I want to know you when the rheumatism sets in and see it in your curled and grizzled hands. And I want to sit next to you when the day comes and you watch the boat go to sea and you drink your coffee in a porcelain mug and tell me the story of that one opener and that one trip. And we can no longer sit quietly and watch the men and women of the sea destroy their bodies and minds with the poisons of drugs and alcohol. We must stand up for our own futures. As good Samaritan vessels in the gale, we have to leave our gear and go get them and bring them back from the stormy sea. Do not let them go quietly into the night. Shout their names. Step between them and their nemesis and barricade your brother in the fish hold if that is what it takes, my friends. But stop the losses. Perhaps you cannot stop them, but you will be there. And you will know them and you will see them and they will know that you care. You cannot change the tides, but you can be the port in the storm, the sheltering bay, the beacon in the dark night. Do not let them go silently into the depths. Reach down, my friends, reach down and let's pull our brothers and sisters back aboard the boat. So I left fishing about 5 years ago. It's funny, I was looking for one of my pieces written in a journal, and the bookmark in said journal was an ultrasound photo of my daughter, and I was like, oh, funny thing, I used to fish, but I don't anymore, and here's one of the big old reasons why. Not that that should stand in the way of any of you considering it, but as I said, I'm married to a coastie, so one of us goes to sea and one of us stays inshore, and someday soon that will switch and he will learn the misery that is the stay-at-home parent. Anyhow, this piece is called I Used to Fish. I used to fish. I know, it's hard to believe. Looking at me, you wouldn't guess that most of my childhood was spent fishing or getting ready to fish or cleaning up from fishing, but I did, and it was. I fished before we were all tricked out in Salmon Sisters gear and polypro layers, in sweatpants and Little League sweatshirts and old t-shirts purchased from the Baptist Mission thrift store in Kodiak. I wore extra tufts without wool socks. And then I wore insulated extra tufts, and then I wore steel-toed extra tufts after one Bristol Bay king salmon season, where I thought for 3.5 weeks that I had broken my foot after 40 pounds of king salmon landed nose down like a kamikaze bomber between my big toe and my index toe. I used to fish, but I don't anymore. I used to bellow into the ocean, into the wind and the rain and the spray. I used to bellow across the deck, "Coming up," as the gear pulled fish from the depths, and I used to shout, "Look out!" to my deckhand as a huge salmon flew over the stern roller and she was head down trying to get a salmon out of a fish basket. A fish basket is when a salmon you catch gets really angry. It weaves itself through the gill net, over the cork line and under the lead line and through the holes as it slowly strangles itself in a monofilament death. And it takes what feels like 100 minutes to untangle it, but it's really probably only 2. I used to take apart hydraulic lines and put back parts of engines after my father tore them apart for repairs. I used to remove hatch covers, bolt by bolt, chipping off splash zone with a flathead screwdriver, and I used to get down and pull out filters and wipe off grime with my bare hands, which was a great introduction to parenting. I once bailed out a gill netter with a crack in the hull with 2 5-gallon buckets and a trash can. I bailed for 4 hours. 4. In the fish hold. Until we got back to the dock. 4 hours of lifting buckets of water out of the bilge, all the while knowing that if I stopped, that boat might sink, my father and myself on it. I was 17 years old, and I used to fish, but I don't anymore. One of my earliest childhood memories is the edge of a red Zodiac bumping across the water and the view of my dad waving from the side of our family longliner as it leaned over just a little. I didn't know at the time, but I later found out, as I recounted the memory to my mom, that it was because we were stuck in the mud. And the boat had run aground in Port Moller, and my dad had sent my mom and me and the crew into the village while he stayed to see what would happen. And I remember watching the boat from a swing on the bank, one of those old metal rickety ones with the peppermint stripe paint that they made in the 70s and 80s, and they rusted very quickly. I used to fish, but I don't anymore. I remember sitting around at Christmas time with my big sister, who's now waiting for me in heaven with fids and ganyons and the smell of freshly split spruce permeating the air. And as we spliced a long line, we crimped ganyons and hooks. I remember that was what Christmas break was. Who doesn't celebrate the holidays by running a log splitter with their siblings, stacking wood together and building tubs of gear? We used those freshly split log rounds as our bases to press our fids into, and we tied the ganyons and we crimped the hooks and we chatted and we sang along to the music together and we complained. My big sister walked me through the social turmoil that is middle school over the piles of stiff white line, sitting on a blue tarp spread on our living room floor next to the Christmas tree that was damn near falling over as it was weighted with a lifetime of collected family ornaments. My sister, who I can no longer see standing in front of me, but whose face I can see clear as glass, and her laugh, I feel the nearness of her smile, because partly due to spending those moments building tubs together. And I used to fish, but I don't anymore. And I know exactly when it became I used to fish. I took a 5-year break after marriage. I got a master's degree. I always lived by the water. I talked about fishing. I talked about salmon. I talked about the oceans, and I worked as an environmental educator, doing my part to teach future generations about the importance of oceans and healthy watersheds and estuaries I volunteered. I busted my ass to stop pebble mine the first time. I used to fish, but I don't anymore. But I went back, and I jumped right back in, and I fished, and I drove the boat from Kodiak to Bristol Bay, and I saw the sunrise behind Castle Cape one last time. But I didn't like the yelling. I didn't like the perpetual nausea and staring at the lead-gray sea that met that cold white sky. The vibrations coming up underneath my feet started to make my ankles and my knees ache after the first week. What is this hateful thing called age? I was constantly freezing, and no amount of Patagucci or Smartwool would fend off the chill, and I found myself wondering, what the hell am I doing out here? And I remember staring out over the water as I thought for the first time, I used to fish, but I don't anymore.
Excuse me, but do you have just a moment? Come over here. I just wanted to ask why you're going to the Fisher Poets gathering.
Because it's a fabulous place to come to in the middle or end of February every year.
So you've gone more than this time?
Third year, yes, yes.
Is there any highlights?
The whole thing is a highlight. It's a joy. Yeah, it's really a fun place to be. Every time I come here, I get more and new creative inspiration from the folks that are up on stage.
Are you a writer?
No,
A fisherman?
at one time, no longer. I'm from Washington. I live up in Seattle area, but I lived in Cordova for many years.
Okay, well, thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
Enjoy.